When I was teaching girls in prison how to meditate and get out of their misery, the first thing I tell them was, you are just like me, except I didn't get caught so young. And that blew their minds. That got their attention, because most of the people who volunteer to come and do empowerment work in the prison system, they're usually do-gooders or religious people or Girl Scouts or recovery people, and they want to help the poor, miserable sods. But in my case, I really empathized with them, and I understood, because I myself was just like them. I was a teenage juvenile delinquent and a teenage drunk, and it went on until I finally received the grace of choosing recovery. I was 36, so I am now more of a sober person than I ever was all my life when I was using drugs, alcohol, bad behavior. And it really helps when you're reaching out to people to tell them, I'm not coming from a superior position. I am coming from the same position as you guys, except I've already been to hell. I can choose to make this reality a heaven just by choosing it. That's the secret, really, what we choose. Most people feel like they're victims when they're caught in those low consciousness places. We're never victims. Even if we're in jail, we have the choice to receive higher significance from things.
I have an extraordinary guest whose life journey reads like an adventure novel, yet carries the depth of a spiritual memoir. Teza Lord has worn many hats, from making props for Steven Spielberg's Jaws to sailing the West Indies, from being the model for the monumental Civitas statues to teaching meditation in juvenile prisons. Her most significant role is the one she holds today, that of a spirit activist using art, writing, and digital media to spread what she calls weapons of mass illumination. Her remarkable journey from an angst-ridden artist to a messenger of love and consciousness offers unique insights into the transformative power of creative spirituality. Welcome to the Transcenders podcast.
Wow, what an introduction. Who is that person? Thanks for having me.
You're most welcome.
It's amazing. It feels like I'm 1,000 years old when I hear about all the things that I've done, and I have not yet stopped.
We'll come across what I call pause continuances in our life. We may have paused something at one time in our life, but then we pick it up later and continue from a completely different perspective.
Pauses are very important. Too often people don't pause. I was doing my yoga route last night. I have a special little temple. I heat up so that it's not cold, which is what the weather is like here. I was in the middle of doing my beautiful praying with my body, which is what I call yoga, the physical part of yoga, when my husband opened the door and brought in a friend who's a very busy emergency room doctor. It's a very dear friend of ours. She wanted to see what it was like when I do my sacred routine. She comes in and she said, wow, it's so quiet in here. I can't be in the quiet for more than a couple of seconds. That was their first response. It's so important for people to take that pause, whether it's from speaking. We don't have to fill the air with nonstop words or nonstop knowledge, just to pause and receive the gift of life through our breath. Her first reaction was not like me in my bikini at the age of 77, or the temperature, which was 100 degrees, and outside it's 40, but we do Fahrenheit here. It was the silence. There was even a very quiet, meditative tape being played, music.
Reflective pause is so important. As you say, people try to fill the space with noise. Being still is a way of being able to communicate and to receive higher intelligence. When we are quiet and we go inside, we pause, we stop, and we bring everything to a standstill and allow ourselves to be free occupied.
It's one way of measuring when you're comfortable with not only yourself, but if you happen to be with another being, to be comfortable in silence. For some people, that's impossible. They have to chatter away. It's almost like a neuroses. Whenever I run into that sort of person, I try to figure, what is it that they're trying to avoid, because they simply chatter so much. So the pause, I feel like, wow, we should all take a deep breath right here and have an official pause to begin our profound and deep conversation. Yeah, let's do that. Let's take a deep inhale through our nose. feel it and then release it slowly through our nose. And notice how everything goes quiet, even with one breath. It's a miracle. To me, these are mini meditations. People can do this at any time, especially when they're stressed. They don't have to sit in a cave for days and weeks and months. They just have to be tuned to their breath and silently follow that beautiful gift of life, the air that comes into our lungs and expands us. It's almost like watching the sun rise. It just fills us with light. I spent 3 months imprisoned, and believe me, those 3 months dragged. It felt like 3 decades. It is not a fun thing to be imprisoned, either in your own mind or in your circumstances in life, or actually in a jail. Time does drag when you're not having fun.
Where were you imprisoned?
That was at the tail end of my pre-sobriety days. If you know my story, if you have read any of my books, I am a recovering person. I was quite a wild child and a bandito. But when I got imprisoned, I actually was innocent. But everything one does in life catches up with one. That's karma. That's the karmic rule of the universe. This was in the Dominican Republic, which I am not fond of. I will never return. It was quite a horrible experience.
Something you can learn from, align your life in a very different way. Things happen for a reason. Having that visceral experience means the work that you do, you're not speaking from an academic pursuit. You're speaking from the very fact you've had the visceral experience of it. And I think that counts for more than anything.
Oh, yeah, because when I was teaching girls in prison how to meditate and get out of their misery, the first thing I tell them was, you are just like me, except I didn't get caught so young. And that blew their minds. That got their attention, because most of the people who volunteer to come and do empowerment work in the prison system, they're usually do-gooders or religious people or Girl Scouts or recovery people, and they want to help the poor, miserable sods. But in my case, I really empathized with them and I understood, because I myself was just like them. I was a teenage juvenile delinquent and a teenage drunk, and it went on until I finally received the grace of choosing recovery. I was 36, so I am now more of a sober person than I ever was all my life when I was using drugs, alcohol, bad behavior, bad people. And it really helps when you're reaching out to people to tell them, I'm not coming from a superior position. I am coming from the same position as you guys, except I've already been to hell. I can choose to make this reality a heaven just by choosing it. That's the secret, really, what we choose. Most people feel like they're victims when they're caught in those low consciousness places. We're never victims. Even if we're in jail, we have the choice to receive higher significance from things.
We're given the yes and the no, which is the greatest gift we're given. A dog can only walk its territory, procreate, do the things dogs do. But I haven't seen a dog play Mozart.
No, but they're working on it. Some dogs are pretty amazing. Susan Orlean, one of my favorite writers, wrote about super dogs. She wrote about Rin Tin Tin, who was a famous TV hero here in America.
Yeah, no, I know it.
And before Rin Tin, he had a predecessor who was a little German Shepherd discovered in France at the end of the war. And somebody realized that this dog had super intelligence. So they brought him to Hollywood and they made movies of him. Unfortunately, he died on a movie set. He got electrocuted. But they realized that dogs could be heroes to kids. So they found Rin Tin.
They come here to teach us fealty or loyalty. They come here to teach us love unconditionally. They're only here for a short time, but what we can learn from them as human beings, it's so profound when you look at the behavioral patterns of the dog that is sitting behind the front door because it senses you're pulling into the driveway and it can't wait to greet you.
Or cats. I have a cat who decided that she liked us better than her owner and wandered over to our house. It was quite a wonderful thing, but to live with a cat is the opposite of living with a dog. But they still have that unconditional connection of love, and they can pick up on the vibrations. That's the thing about animals. They don't have to have the words. They don't have to have the facts. They just can pick up when, for instance, if you're going on a trip, they can tell.
They read your
Or,
lights.
yeah, they read your energy.
And it's interesting that dogs are magnetic, whereas
Mhm.
cats are electrical. You
The,
try and summon your cat. It's like
right.
they're all over the place. So
You
you've
have to,
got the whole electromagnetic.
you have to
Um,
bribe them.
yeah, you got to bribe them.
I love the fact that dogs also are seizure alert dogs. We were talking about Weimarimers in particular. That species is really sensitive to when an epileptic human being is preparing in their
Wow.
brains to short wire. And the dog can notify its owner. That's why it's so important for these service dogs that they not be treated as pets and
Mm.
people don't go up and get all friendly with them because they're working. They can save lives.
Let's talk about art. I see your journey from creating art, celebrated fear and confusion, to becoming a messenger of love and unity. Really struck me. You spent years in traditional artistic pursuits before experiencing a profound shift in your creative expression. The transition from the Museum of Fine Arts to props for Jaws to spiritual activism shows fascinating evolution. Can you take us back to the moment you first realized your art needed to shift from expressing angst to expressing love? What catalyzed that transformation?
Yeah, that's an interesting subject. Okay. In my early days, because I've always been a creative wannabe, I had to learn my craft. Of course, people who are having a desire to express themselves in a medium, you have to learn your craft. So you just do whatever you can to learn it and work, work, work until these things become second nature. And subject matter is not so important as the ability to manipulate a medium, whether it's two-dimensional, three-dimensional, colors, clay, or shapes. In the early days, of course, I was just drawing and painting and copying like crazy anything. My original portfolio to get accepted into the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston was mostly copying. Like a lot of the great artists, they start as draftsmen. Like Picasso was an expert draftsman. A lot of people don't realize that. He could draw anything when he was a kid. By the time he got to be a young man, he said, "This is boring." He went to Paris with others who were experimenting with something new and novel to set them apart from the pack that was just doing what people had been doing for centuries, which was basically heralding the joy of religions, because that's what most great art was doing up until the Impressionists started messing around with their imaginations. Picasso decided, I'm going to fragment this perfect picture here and put an eyeball over there and an arm over there. I am absolutely a draftsman. I can draw anybody realistically, but ho hum, how boring. But it comes in handy when you're a traveling gypsy like I was, sailing all over the Caribbean. And if I needed some moolah, money, I would just set up in a hotel lobby and whip out people's portraits. I was slipped some extra bucks to remove double chins and triple chins to make people look better. The early days of realism is how I came to be able to do what I want to do in my imagination. So I no longer have to use a model. I no longer have to use a photograph. I have become accustomed to interpreting my thoughts in visual manners, whether it's a material or just a drawing, a quickie drawing. Like, for instance, I was driving through Santiago, Chile on one trip, and I saw the most extraordinary sight of a homeless man, was taking a bath in a public fountain to Neptune and all his wives. And it was an amazing sight, but I was whizzing by on a taxi, didn't have a camera, but I had my imagination. So my mind went click. Later on in my hotel room, I drew that scene perfectly. The man was nude. He had his clothes neatly folded next to him where he was bubbling and soaping himself in the fountain. People were just walking by, accepting that this homeless man needed a bath. It was a lovely moment. It's one of my favorite drawings. And it's just such a gift to be able to have that familiarity with interpreting what is happening in life with another way. And of course, eventually I did that with words and creating books. So my work evolved as I became more proficient with my craft. Meanwhile, my life, because I had been embroiled in addiction, I fed into that needing to escape because of my upbringing. There were signposts that this was happening in my life. That was my guidance. If you have trouble, just drink. When you come from an alcoholic home, that's what people usually do. When I finally realized I had a choice, I did not have to do that. I did not have to kill myself with drugs and alcohol. And I came into sobriety. My work, my artwork became filled with the light of positive thinking rather than negative thinking. Even though I had the same gifts of being able to interpret a human body, I know the skeleton, I know the articulations, I know the muscles. I don't need a model. I could use that knowledge by creating wondrous things like people flying away from trouble instead of being grounded in the muck, which a lot of contemporary artists do. Angst has been a big seller in the art world for many decades, and it's quite annoying. If every artist could focus their gifts on slogans of upliftment that are visual, what a different world we would have. But a lot of artists don't. They're stuck in the mundane. They'll put their effort into stupid things. Like I saw a famous artist that I respect his technique, but his subject matter is pedantic. His latest series is people in motel rooms, nude, a dog. Okay, so that's his theme and like beautifully painted. But what does it teach us? What does it help us with our struggles? Because everybody's struggling on this planet, whether physically, mentally, or spiritually. This is what the human condition is. That's why it's so great to have mythology. I love talking with you, Peter, because mythology puts it into simple terms that even our ancestors dealt with. The same struggles that mythology talks about is being reenacted over and over again in our human family. So I would say that my decision to go into the light with my art was absolutely pivotal with getting away from being an inebriated person.
What a journey. And history repeats itself in well-trodden routes. The outplay and the dressage may be different, but it's also similar in lots of ways. If we look back at history and mythology, we just dress it up and made it look sexy in the 21st century, which has divorced it from the essence of what it was. But I see a return to that.
Can I just add a thought there?
Yeah.
Like the current political situation is also emblematic, in my opinion, about how, in order to have transformation or transcendence, which I love the name of your podcast, we must go to the extreme. People don't just wake up one day and say, I think I'm going to change. They usually have to have, in recovery rooms, they call it the bottom. And if people are not in the recovery vocabulary, they might just say something horrific has to happen. The shit has to hit the fan in order for people to wake up and change. I do believe that's what's happening, at least here in America. I don't keep up with the present situation so much in the UK. I do read the news. I don't listen to it. I want to be able to interpret the facts myself. So that's why I read the news. But here in America, the current political situation, when people ask me, aren't you upset? I would say no, because we are getting closer to that incredible point in any person's history or culture's history where extremism is going to shift and we go the opposite end of the pendulum, and then the pendulum shifts there. And eventually we come to where the pendulum settles down in the middle and we have real solid change. And that's happening.
It's going to climb in its potency this year and the next couple of years. We're going to see significant changes with a lot of unmarshaled turbulence. My sense is that being still, understanding more about stillness and quiet, and going into the descent, it's like Trophonius's cave in Greece, which has been a significant mythological and historical site for centuries, because in antiquity it was believed to be a portal to the underworld. It was linked to both prophecy and mysterious, almost mystical experiences Trophonius was an enigmatic figure from Greek mythology, and he was considered a chthonic god or hero associated with the underworld. The myth of Trophonius and his cave is fascinating and eerie, along with his brother Archimedes, who was an architect who helped build the Temple of Apollo at Delphi. After they completed their task, they sought to hide their craftsmanship from Apollo's prying eyes by creating this clever mechanism to conceal the temple's treasure. But Apollo, in retribution, killed both brothers. After their deaths, Trophonius was transformed into a god associated with the afterlife. But the cave became a sacred site for those seeking prophetic visions, and they would undergo a harrowing ritual. According to the ancient descriptions, the process was physically and psychologically intense. The participants would descend into the cave, submerge themselves in a pool of water, and experience visions and revelations. The experience was awe-inspiring and terrifying, and left the participants in this altered state of consciousness or distress. Some accounts suggest the process could either lead to insanity or deep, irreversible changes in the person's mind. That cave has become quite famous as a place of divine insight and peril. And that's what led to its central role in the mythology of ancient Greece, because people traveled from across the ancient world to seek answers to important questions about their fate or future. The intense nature of the experience also contributed to the cave's reputation as a place of danger, where the boundary between the living and the dead, between knowledge and madness, was tenuously thin.
Talking about this, I'm thinking this is what we humans have within our very own heart. We have the cave within us. And in this modern day, we have so many teachers who their job is to help people to discover that cave within us so that we no longer have to go to the sacred sites that are in Greece or Machu Picchu or in Thailand or in Rome. We can make the journey within our own inner cave, our heart, where our soul is speaking to us. We can do that with patience, with discipline, and we can be there at any moment, at any time, just like we started off with a breath, with an intention of going into that heart cave. It's a lovely thing that in this day and age, there are so many spiritual teachers. I don't consider myself a teacher, but I have the skills, and if anybody ever asked me to help them, I would. It helped many people realize that all these answers we so desperately need and want and should have access to are right within our own heart. If we still our mind long enough for the chatter to stop and go deeply into that inner cave where all the secrets are hidden about any question we have, or what should I do with this? I can give an example. As a meditator, you just open yourself to the source of all. So you go into a meditation, and somewhere in the back of my mind, I might have an issue, like pondering, where should I go with this issue? It's saying that I need an answer for it, but it's in the back of my mind. And so in meditation, I'm going to the cave, doing what I need to do to still the mind, using mantra, using breath, using a quiet place, and forgetting about time, like what has happened so many times. All of a sudden, like a billboard will appear in my consciousness saying, do this, turn here, don't do that. When that happens, because when you meditate, you really do have a relationship with consciousness. I no longer question myself like, is that some weird ego trip that I'm on? No, it's not. When you have worked with this energy within yourself, and you are not using inebriants, because that's very important. You have to have the natural state of mind that we are born with. And when these messages arise from that deep cave of the heart, I just say, all right, that is the answer. And I don't second guess it. And many times I've had those directions, and never once has it led me down the wrong path. It's truly a gift. It's like having an inner sacred temple that we can all access at any time. Before I learned how to meditate, I used to have my oracle, the I Ching. I was very much into the ritual of asking and receiving through the ritual of the I Ching, which you probably are familiar with. People have always wanted help with the questions and the energy that we have in life. We don't want to misuse it. We would like to have the most that we can in this life. So it's only natural that we all want to go to the oracle, wherever it is.
I see meditation as a pilgrimage. In Trophonius's cave, it wasn't just a simple pilgrimage. It was the ceremonies associated with the cave involved several steps. Before you could enter the cave, you would have to make certain sacrifices. You have to purify yourself. You would consult with priests who acted as the intermediaries between the divine and the human realm. But once you were inside the cave, you would experience visions or prophecies, and those visions could be cryptic or even frightening, because the cave was believed to reveal hidden truths about the future, death, and the soul's journey. The visions were said to be inextricably linked to the psychological and physical state of the person undergoing the experience. This raises questions about the intersection of the human mind and the divine, whether such transformative experiences were a form of psychological catharsis or whether they had a deeper, more spiritual significance. I think the role of myth in modern times can be a remedial balm for the psyche, because in modern times we find ourselves living in this world saturated with information, constant stimulation, and a disconnection from nature and the deeper aspects of our psyche. Ancient myths like that of Trophonius's cave, we could see that as some sort of poetic or mythological or mystical trope, but it belongs to a distant mystical past. For me, it continues to offer valuable insights into the human condition, because the myth of Trophonius and the experience of the cave can serve as a metaphor for modern challenges. It can embrace transformations through adversity. The experience in the cave is not a comfortable experience. It's intense. It's disorientating. It's terrifying in the same way many of our modern struggles, whether psychological, existential, societal, can be overwhelming. But the cave reminds me that growth can emerge from discomfort when we go into the descent, not the ascent. If I look at this in a modern context, this myth encourages me to face my fears, confront my inner darkness, and emerge stronger from personal trials. So this means confronting my cave, whether they're feelings of anxiety or depression or fear, and use them as opportunities for self-discovery.
Absolutely. That's why people use isolation chambers. People go to extremes to access that so-called mythological spot that is within each one of us if we know how to get there. If a person wants to experience that, I'm just saying that they don't have to travel to Greece to go into the cave. They can seek a teacher who is offering to access this place within, which is called meditation, which is called just stilling the mind and getting away from ego thinking and tapping into the divine, which you mentioned, is not separate from humans. It is part and parcel of our essence. Once you realize what life is really about, it's not just this blood and guts and being born and work and die situation here. It's pretty magical when you elevate your concepts of the ordinary and see that something extraordinary is always happening. If we just choose to approach it from a different plane than we probably were trained to do as children. I know myself, my parents were not into the magic of life. I wanted to be an artist even as a kid. They said, no, you cannot be an artist. That's something you only do after the work is done and the kids are fed and the house is tidy, and then maybe you can do a little doily or something. No, I did not want that. I wanted to be like a nun dedicated to art. I wanted to marry this muse within me and see where it took me. But I had to go against my parents' wishes, and I was ostracized from my family for that and never understood. My people never said, "Oh, this is great what you're doing." No, they said, "What a waste of life you're doing." Until I finally married my husband 33 years ago and helped him raise his two kids. Then my parents could relate to what I was doing. So a lot of times we who are seekers, we're called seekers these days because we're a little different than other people who say, "Nah, I don't believe in that crap." Really, they would call themselves atheists. They don't believe in the magic of life. They don't believe in the supreme intelligence that is at work here, holding the planets from colliding into each other and helping us stay on our path when we're in our natural state. When we're seekers, when we want to have the ultimate that life provides us, sometimes we have to go against the system. We have to war to our own drum and be ready to have people think that we're odd. I don't know a single person who's an artist, either in the visual arts, dancing, or music, or poetry, who doesn't walk to a different drummer. The people who are in the same routine as their teachers had been, or the people who are more or less just interpreting the same things over and over again. I don't consider them true artists. I consider them crafts who are just reinterpreting the same old thing. Truly creative people are tapping into a different energy than mankind has ever known. And each one of us who is in that, even as an intellectual, you can be creative. You're trying to see the same old stuff from a different perspective. Like I was talking about Picasso earlier, he fragmented reality. He said reality is humdrum. People have been doing this for centuries. Let's fragment it. If you ever really look at Picasso's work, you can see what it is. You can see the woman with a guitar or the postman or whatever he's doing. But he's made it so that we have to be challenged with our perceptions in order to put it all together to see what it is that he has represented for us. So it's a little more challenging.
We try to correct what the last generation couldn't get to. The response of my parents was part of the Piscean age. And some of the key themes were characterized by organized religion, devotion. Christianity began around the start of the Piscean age, and that became one of the most influential religions. Self-sacrifice for a higher cause was seen as a virtue, leading to figures like Jesus Christ and spiritual martyrs and religious institutions promoting suffering as a path to enlightenment. That age was marked by structured religious institutions and monarchies and centralized power in both politics and spirituality. The focus was on those structures. If we transition now to the age of Aquarius, the emphasis is more on individual freedom over hierarchy, technology, AI, science, innovation, spirituality based on knowledge rather than blind faith. So I see this transition is marked by societal shifts, such as decentralization of power, the rise of technology, and a focus on equality and interconnectedness.
It depends on what people's value systems are. In another family, a kid who wants to be an artist is celebrated and it's considered a gift. In America, that's not very common. It's more common in Europe. They acknowledge artisticness much more than in America, they've even taken away the arts in grade school, in lower schools. Kids are not allowed to express themselves because the funding is not there. It's important for kids to get physical, go out and play, but it's also important for them to have this connection with expressing themselves artistically. So what you just said, I was listening, I'm trying to wrap my head around it. It's all very complex and scholarly, but I think you left out a key issue. For me, the age of Aquarius is really about putting the focus on the true connection of the divine in the sacredness of our humanness, not something that we have to achieve outside of ourselves with either knowledge, locale, or AI, but a simple evolution of consciousness, which happens through also the arts, not just technology. For instance, like 100, 200 years ago, people who were trying to depict things scientifically. I used to be a scientific illustrator of plants before I became a visionary artist. Botanical studies was almost like people had Vaseline on their eyes. They were trying to draw for scientists what they actually saw. But their consciousness was not yet evolved to what we have evolved en masse as the human species. To the best of their ability, they just could not see the fine articulation that the scientific world needed. I studied the hundreds of years old botanical studies, and in today's world, people have been gifted with this evolution of consciousness just through the fact that we as a human race are in this together. We're evolving together. It's not just one person who has all the answers with AI and technology and the cave and Greece. We, as a family of man, is having this phenomena of our consciousness evolving genetically and DNA and culturally and socially. It just happens. So when you do a botanical study today, every single tiny articulation and tiny hair is able to be seen and interpreted by the artist, because that's the level of mass consciousness uplifting that we have gone through in the last 500 years, especially. People were really stuck in some dark places 500 years ago with their consciousness. We are so rapidly evolving, not just because of evolution of technology and knowledge spreading, but because so many people are really interested in elevating their consciousness here and now in their own homes with whatever tools they have, and surrounding themselves by other people who get it and promote this consciousness, because that's what they talk about, that's what they honor. And this other stuff, they just don't give that much attention to because it's bygone. It's considered a lower level of attention. So I think it's a very exciting time that we're in. And even though we have achieved great strides in evolution of our consciousness, it's infinite, it's boundless to the ability of what our human mind is capable of. Like myself, I'm always trying to learn Spanish. Before I was concentrating on French. I'm not a gifted person with other languages. Here I am, day after day, learning a new word, learning a grammatical sense of how to express myself, but I don't live in a Spanish-speaking country. And so I'm limited. And as soon as I go to a place like Peru or Costa Rica or even España, my evolution, that consciousness grasping of another language, just goes by leaps, and I'm there. So it's very important that we all surround ourselves with the highest that we can, and not tune into things that drag us down or remind us from whence we came. For instance, our parents did the best they could, but my parents, I had to rebel against them. I became an artist and they didn't like it. They didn't celebrate it. They didn't tell all their friends. I was just an outcast. And that's okay. That's the sacrifice that people have to make who are pioneers in consciousness, especially, or in any other way. There's so many remarkable ways that we all try to evolve. And our culture right now is going through a shock because hands are being slapped. Oh, no, don't go that far, with the environment, with the gender identification, in so many ways. Even the migration thing, it's a shock overnight, but it's all going to work out perfectly because it is happening. And it's causing people to think about how they feel about it, rather than just being numbed out by their screens. A lot of people are on medical marijuana or recreational marijuana, and a lot of people are just numbing themselves out. But I truly believe, and I'm going to quote a political writer, Peggy Noonan, who has written for decades for politicians and also for the Wall Street Journal, said in a recent essay that people are going to have real difficulty unless they have what she called a religious faith. Now, the true word of religious is not about what religion you practice, but about the discipline in which you practice it. If you have a religious faith in the connection that we are all eligible to be connected to the divine and to each other through our consciousness, then that is religious faith. Even though it's not a church, it's not a temple, it's not some place where you go to and say, okay, I'm that kind of a religious person. But the spirituality of faith these days is very strong and getting stronger. And I can see it because I'm online and I do a lot of activism with tweets, Instagram, podcasts, and putting up mind stillers on my YouTube channels. People can actually access the state of mind where they don't feed into the hysteria that the media is promoting, because the media really needs people to pay attention to it. And sensationalism is at the basis of our society. If you're not a sensational person, why should they bother with you? If you don't have something extraordinary about yourself, you're stuck way back in the back folds of the news.
What's the maxim? If it doesn't bleed, it doesn't lead. It's part of the machinery of distraction.
Yeah, it's lulling our consciousness to sleep, and we become inured to anything unless it's sensational. So those quiet moments, those pauses in which we can actually feel that we are in connection with the divine consciousness that is holding this whole shebang together. It's hard for people to access it.
There's several compelling phenomena that talks about deep connections. If you look at something like quantum entanglement at the quantum level, those particles can become entangled, meaning the quantum state of each particle cannot be described independently. And Einstein called this spooky action at a distance, where when you measure one particle, you instantly know information about its entangled partner, regardless of the distance. So what does that suggest? It suggests a fundamental interconnectedness at the smallest scales of reality. You can see this even in ecological systems. Life on Earth functions as one vast interconnected web. A change in one species ripples through the entire ecosystems. And the Gaia hypothesis, which was proposed some time ago by James Lovelock,
James Lovelock.
yeah, he suggested that Earth's biosphere acts as one self-regulating living system.
And we are.
And we are. And if you look at the first law of thermodynamics, it tells us that energy cannot be created or destroyed, only transformed. So the atoms in these bodies are quite literally forged in ancient stars. As Carl Sagan said, we are star stuff. And the water molecules we drink today have cycled through countless other organisms over billions of years. So if my body's atoms are constantly being replaced, what stays constant about me?
Isn't that cool? Isn't that cool to think about? Just think about it. We are all recycled energy, and we are all not just connected through consciousness, which is not something you can put under a microscope or take a slide of and analyze it. Actually, mostly water. We are just living crystals vibrating with energy, because water in liquid form is one thing, but when it's frozen, it's crystalline. So we really are vibrating energy. And yes, we are stardust, and yes, we are interconnected. And the Native Americans said it so well when the colonial guys came over and started messing around with their holy places. They said, we are all interconnected like a web. Way before the World Wide Web was named. I think it was Chief Seattle said this, and it was back in the 17th century or something. And what you do to one, you do to all. There is no such thing as just isolating anything. Look at our own body. If we get a splinter under our little tiny toenail, we feel it. We feel it strongly. You can't just say, okay, toe, you're way down there. You're not part of me. No, it is all interconnected. And our bodies are the microcosm of this whole shebang, which is the macrocosm. My mind can say, okay, Splinter, I feel you. I am going to give you some attention. I'm going to take care of you. I'm going to remove that splinter. And because my brain way up here feels what is happening way down there at that little tiny toe. The same thing happens when we hear about what's happening to people who are our own species in another part of the world, or what's happening to the Amazonian rainforest because it's disappearing. And that's part of our cellular makeup. The water that we're drinking probably was in the Amazon not long ago, somewhere like between 100 and 150 years ago. I don't know the analytics, but all water is being recycled. I recently was in Patagonia. I'll tell you, everywhere where there's drought, the water is in Patagonia. That's where it ends up. There's so much beautiful waterfalls and streams and rivers, but we are interconnected, and that's soothing and it's comforting to people during this time because a lot of people are stressed and in a state of fear or anger, which is another mask that fear wears. If they're scared, that's fear. If they're angry, that's fear because they feel they're not in control. And with all the changes, not just the weather, but political and evolutionary and culturally, we're all just transforming ourselves and raising ourselves up. Sometimes we have to fall down a little bit, but we raise ourselves up again and we fall down a little bit. It's not a straight line, but we are in the process of evolution. Every single second and every single person counts in the evolution of our whole entire blended human family. Every single person counts.
There are no straight lines in nature, not even in a blade of grass, not even in your human body. There are no straight lines.
Yeah. My artistic mentor is Hundertwasser. Many people might know him in Europe, and I met him sailing in the Caribbean. And of course, he's not on the planet anymore, but he is deep within my soul. He truly believed there is no such thing as a straight line. And he did many architectural projects. There's no straight line in any of Hundertwasser's buildings, wineries, industrial complexes, hotels, etc., etc. He truly was a pioneer in bringing nature into architecture. And now, of course, there are many architects who are copying nature. They call it biomimicry. And in many different ways, the ways even that I swim laps. I have a pair of swimming fins that are just like a fish's, not just the heavy, cumbersome things that traditional old-fashioned fins are, but these very light, aerodynamically designed fins that replicate what a fish would use. And the speed of my laps has increased 100-fold. And it's just wonderful the way we can mimic other species in our humanness.
There are so many communication networks, and I'm not talking about email or AI, but in terms of how communication networks span ecosystems and reach even into the atmosphere. For example, the smell of petrichor, rain hitting dry soil, is a complex chemical dialogue between soil, bacteria and plants that influences weather patterns. So in terms of quantum field theory and ancient spiritual traditions, tells me that the underlying fields connect everything. I was reading about the Higgs field in physics, which gives particles their mass. And in a similar fashion, many traditions speak of an underlying consciousness field, the Akashic field, the quantum consciousness field that gives rise to individual awareness. And the patterns of connection that we see from neural networks to fungal networks to galaxy clusters to evolution to astrology to astronomy, they all follow similar mathematical principles. To me, that suggests a fundamental organizing principle in nature that operates across scales, supporting both the scientific principles of universality and the spiritual concepts of divine order, or I would call it cosmic harmony. If you look at the modern complexity of science and ancient wisdom, these traditions that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. So consciousness, life, and physical reality may be emergent phenomena arising from networks of relationships rather than fundamental building blocks. And I think there are quite a lot of implications to this, because if everything is interconnected, whether through quantum entanglement or shared genetic heritage or ecological relationships or fields of consciousness, that tells me that individual actions have far reaching consequences through complex networks of causality. So consciousness and matter may be two aspects of the same underlying reality. The boundary between self and other may be more fluid and permeable than we typically assume it is. So does that call for a stance or a posture and an ethic of reverence for life? And as Chief Seattle talked about, a careful consideration of our impact on the whole system, because then practices like meditation allow us to directly experience interconnectedness. And so that's a valuable tool for understanding reality. Because
Wow. Whew. All
that's a
right. Yeah, your reality is based upon this thirst to have knowledge, I can tell. And my reality is my thirst for experiencing it. As you were talking, I can give you two examples of this need to recognize the interconnectedness, the oneness that we're talking about. Okay, so you talked about the Higgs field. And of course, we have the Higgs boson, which was discovered, I think, something like 2017, something like 16, maybe. To me, that was a pivotal point in mankind's understanding of what's it all about, Charlie. And after many years and many theories put forth by Mr. Higgs mostly, they determined that yes, there is a commonality of an invisible electron that had been suspected that was in all matter and to all known matter, because of course we can only assume that there's matter that we do not know about because we have not gone to the far reaches of the multiverse yet. So when this was discovered in the CERN facility, that was a big deal. They even called it jokingly the God theory. Because, okay, God is supposedly all seeing, all knowing. And for people who do believe in that word, God, it could also be the source, the force, cosmic consciousness, whatever. Doesn't necessarily have to be the word God. They believe that there is a connecting consciousness, faith, whatever it's interpreted in different ways in different languages by scientists one way and artistic poets the other. We all know that science is catching up with the spiritual great sages of ancient times. Both the scriptures and people like William Blake and Khalil Gibran, and people who have just been secular but been talking about the spiritual essence being the true essence of our humanity. So the Higgs boson was really monumental in my understanding of scientifically figuring out how to talk about things that I feel when I go into meditation and I eliminate my need to know answers, which is an ego thing. Ego is okay for some things, but when you're trying to have a direct connection with the source, you don't want to be having a debate with it. Who are you and how can you identify yourself? You just feel it and you go deep and you dive and you learn to trust it. It is a beautiful connection when you have the ability to connect to the divinity that all of us have. It's not just special people. That's the first thing that came up when you were talking about oneness. And the other thing was love, recognizing something in another. Doesn't necessarily have to be a person. It could be loving a cave, loving a cat, loving knowledge. Love is a resonance, a vibratory understanding of our humanness where we relate. We're on the same wavelength. We're connecting. We're vibrating. Something about ourselves has been activated by either another person like yourself, Peter. I'm vibrating. I love this conversation. And also I'm thinking about my husband, because when people have a spiritual marriage like ours is, we can state with all honesty that Teza and Carter, that's his name, when we came together, we dedicated our togetherness to be much bigger than what we could be individually as Teza by herself and Carter by himself. Not that we're codependent, but we like to think of ourselves as interdependent, that we become bigger and able to do things because we are a unit and dedicated to this spiritual concept of what marriage is in our estimation, because both of us, we got married in our mid 40s and we'd already tried the other kind of marriage. His based on attraction and kids, and mine based on many other things besides that. By the time we decided that we wanted to join our lives together, I really came to the place in my life where I could say it was the first time that I felt love in a way that I wanted to join my life, my precious life, that I really treasure more than anything. I treasure my life. Everybody does. We do all sorts of things to stay alive. That's our job here, to stay alive. But when I met my husband, I hadn't even met him physically. It was before the day of digital and email and everything. I met him in the late 80s, and I just heard his voice, and his voice resonated something inside my being. I was a sober person. I had already gone through that threshold of saying no to the hell that I had created out of life. And I was saying yes to the possibility of heaven on earth that I was in the midst of creating. One of the things I was doing to create that life was manifesting a mate. And I truly believe that people who are looking for mates, either as a traveling companion or as a romantic partner, once you get clear about what your needs are, you set this intention, you give it to the universe, which is consciousness, and you say, okay, that's what I'm asking for. You send out those vibrations, those cellular attraction phenomes that is going to bring it in, just like looking for a big fish in the ocean. And so my husband happened to call me because of a mutual friend saying, hey, you should call Teza. And when I heard his voice, I felt it all the way in every cell in my being. This was a pivotal moment in my life. And it just got better and better when I saw how handsome he was and the kids that automatically came, because I always thought kids would be in my life, and how important love is. I just want to stress the fact that love is the opposite of fear. If anyone ever feels like I don't understand life, it's also complex, that's fear. And you can choose and say, I'm going to try something different and go for the opposite, which is love. And love is a vibratory uplifting of consciousness. You don't have to understand why or where from or where to or any of those things that might be satisfactory for people who need knowledge. You can just tune into the feeling mode, which is our gift as humans. The animals have feelings too. Come on, there's such feeling animals. They can tell when we're ready to cry and they'll come over and give you a lick. We need to pay more attention to our feelings than facts, because feelings are our ability to love ourselves, love our humanness, and they are indications of what we need. It's like our soul, our psyche, or whatever part of ourselves is the mystery of life, saying, I need this and I need that. Well, you get signals, and those are feeling. And when you're going with the flow and you're feeling you're on the right track, you feel good. You feel happy. And when you're not doing something that is right for you, for your own individual growth, spiritual growth, mental growth, intellectual growth, you will not feel that content. You will feel a disruption, and your feelings are very important on the journey to the mystery of the cave within.
That's beautiful. And yeah, I'm very curious. My mind's very curious. I write down questions about things such as, when I look at my experience, where do I end and where does the world begin?
So I was present for the passing of both my father and my mother. I was more or less their guide, because it just happened to be the gift that they gave me. They gave me life, and I was present at their passing over into the beyond. I can share something that my first book is called We Are One. It was my manifesto, because everything is about we are one. Everything is that comes before and goes after that book is about we are one. So my father was passing from this physical world into the next world, and he happened to be in a state that one could call out of your mind. He had left his consciousness because he was at the advanced last stages of cancer, and he was in the process of leaving his life. I was in the room with him, and he got out of bed. He was tethered to oxygen, and he spread out his big arms like as if he was a condor up in the Andes, and started swerving around. And I had to make sure he didn't fall because this is a very weak, sick man. He was near death. I knew that. I was alone with him, and he was just soaring somewhere for quite a while. Then he came back to bed. I helped him back into bed. Eventually, he came back to being able to speak words. He looked at me, his eyes finally focused that I was in the room. I said, Dad, are you all right? He said, isn't it sad that some of us don't know how we are all one? And we don't realize it until it's too late. Because that's where he was. That's where he went. He was experiencing, in the oomph degree, the oneness that we all are, but some of us just deny, or we're too busy, or we don't believe it, and we are just, it's too freaky. But he was experiencing it. Then he came back more into his consciousness. I could tell there was a difference again, and he looked at me and said, oh, you're here. I said, yeah. Dad, do you know what just happened? He said, no, what happened? So I related back to him. I said, you were somewhere. You were able to finally come back to tell me with your words that isn't it sad that some people just don't realize that we are all one until too late? And my dad said, I said that? I said, yes, you just said that to me because that's where you were. He said, no kidding. I said that. His dying moments were filled with such bliss because I was there as a reporter. I was like taking notes and verifying his experience because as he was leaving his physical body, he had already been given a preview of the energy of oneness and continuation, and nothing ends. I could give that to him as a gift as he slowly lost consciousness forever. And he died. So it was a beautiful thing.
Beautiful story, beautiful moment. It makes me wonder, where is the precise boundary between one and not one?
It's pretty thin. And some people are more gifted about that veil. They call it the veil of Isis in ancient mythology. The veil of Isis is very thin for some people. I don't think they're more gifted than other people. It's just they feel comfortable with that ability. So they nurture it. And they are the ones who become the psychics or the mediums. Oh, of course, there are charlatans in every aspect of life, but there are truly people who have the gift of the veil is very thin for some people. Not me. I can't see auras. I just feel the oneness, and I love it.
It's interesting because our bodies are not truly separate. If I think about the constant exchange of atoms with our environment, we host trillions of microorganisms and remain dependent on an intricate web of life for every breath we take. So who or what is aware of my thoughts? And if I'm having an experience, who or what exactly is having it? And in deep meditation, what remains of the I?
It dissolves, and you become, in the world of yoga, we call it the witness. You become the witness. And your I, which is another word for the ego, it dissolves. With practice, this becomes very easy. But I remember when I first started meditating, and I had to learn to meditate because I was having deep problems. I've already said I was in the dark, and I was thinking about bad thoughts, killing myself because life was so uncomfortable. I needed to have big change in my life. So I asked to be taught how to meditate and instantly received the gift of transformation in consciousness, because when you're with a good teacher, you get there like super fast. With good teaching, our job as seekers is to keep up with the practice of knowing that this cave in our heart is right here and we can go there anytime we want, and it becomes a part of our life. When I first started experiencing that, my nervous system was shot and I would just fall asleep. That happens very often to people when their nervous system is shredded because they've been living in fear. Those nerves have to rejuvenate and heal, and eventually they will be intact. Then you can start having the transcendent experience of our humanness that is available for everyone if we choose to experience it in the natural state of our mind.
When I consider consciousness itself, because I can only consider consciousness, when I feel separate, what exactly am I separate from? the observer from the observed. In deep meditation or profound experiences, as you said, the sense of the I, the separation, dissolves. In many mystical traditions, they've independently arrived at the same insight. This sense of separation is an illusion. We're really like waves thinking we're separate from the ocean, but we're not. I want to be rigorous as well in my thinking about it.
That's the danger. You can't think about the divine. You have to
I know.
experience it. You can't analyze it. I know you love to do that. That's good for scholars, but there might be a time in your life where you really want to immerse yourself in the sensation of the divine, and you can't think your way there. You can't. You have to surrender. Go into the cave of the heart for whatever technique you're using. If a thought comes up, but I really want to, then you see the thought as a cloud that comes into this clear, beautiful sky, which is your consciousness. When you are connected with the divine, you are one with the divine, but a thought comes because that's what we do. We have minds. Our brains are designed to think. So a thought comes up. The difference is if you really want to experience the divine, you look at that thought and say, oh, there's a thought coming up from my egoic part of myself, and I don't have to talk to it. There's the thought, like a cloud, and then watch it drift by and dissolve. The difference is you don't talk to that thought. You just say to yourself, I have a thought. I'm going to watch it. I'm not going to talk to it. As long as you engage in that thought, you are in your ego. And you will not experience the divine unless you learn the technique of bypassing the ego and getting to the source. And using the ego when you have an assignment to write a scholarly book or to have a scholarly discussion. We all need our egos, our healthy egos. They're necessary. They are who we are. But to experience the sacred and the divine and the oneness and the continuation of consciousness that never ends, we must eliminate engaging in the ego.
So let me ask you, because I feel compelled to ask you, if everything is one, why do people experience separation?
Fear, because they have not yet dedicated themselves to love. I can tell you that I have moments of weakness. Yesterday, I had an argument with my husband. It's very rare. It's over stupid football. How mundane, right? So we had a disagreement, and all of a sudden, I was thrown out of my reverie, which is my natural state of mind, which I foster oneness. Even in challenges, even in a discussion like this, that's my focus. It was challenging yesterday because my feelings got hurt, and feelings are so much a part of not just us as people, but our spiritualization. Our feelings tell us what we need to do. My feelings at the end of this disruption to my oneness choice was I need to make some choices. I need to have the ability, and that's ego. I needed to be in my ego to sort out this dilemma so that he was happy, I was happy about the football situation. It had to deal with a conflict of my schedule doing a sacred yogic event. I fortunately could do that because I said I could go ask somebody for advice. Other people have other opinions. I said I've come to a place where I trust my opinion because I've done the work and I've had so many other opportunities to test. Is my opinion worth anything? Yes, it is. I thought about it. That's when the thinking is so necessary, when we really have a dilemma. I thought, okay, I can do this. I negotiated with my husband. He was happy. I was happy. Another crisis was averted. And I could go back into that preferred state of mind, which is that we are all connected and we are all one. But yes, sometimes we're challenged and we have to use that ability, our thinking ability, our logical side of the brain. Basically, it's been described as there's two different sides of the brain. You know about that, right? And there's a wonderful TED Talk by Jill Bolte Taylor that every time I see that, I cry. She was a brain scientist and experienced a massive stroke. The side of her brain that's logical, which is the left side, died. She, as a scientist, lost the ability to even use numbers or think what her name was. And the right side of her brain was thriving during this experience, and she was in bliss. She was experiencing oneness because that's the right side of the brain. That's the creative side. That's the non-logical side. So as she recovered, and she had a full recovery, she's explaining that both these sides of the brain are ours to nurture. And people who are just in one side of the brain are not as well balanced as they could be. I've always been intrigued by being not just a wonderful creative person, but being typist and an avid reader and a lover of science. And so I've always nurtured both sides of my brain. I truly believe now that science has explained that we have these two very remarkably different sides of the brain. She brought out a human brain on stage in the TED Talk and split it open to show it actually has a separation in the organ. It's joined by this primordial part of our brain called the amygdala, which is going into the fear of flight mode. That's when we're in the amygdala thing, we want to get out of there as fast as we can. So if you want a scientific explanation of this, I urge you to see that TED Talk. I think it's called My Stroke of Good Fortune.
Dr. Ian McGilchrist, he's written a book on the left and right hemispheres. But yes, I'll definitely check that out. I like to structure arguments for and against. I'm almost like the ringmaster, trying to look at both sides of things. The fact that things are interconnected, and this is my devil's advocate, does not mean they are one. So a symphony, as an example, is interconnected, but it requires different instruments. The internet's also interconnected, but it consists of discrete nodes. So the very concept of oneness, I wonder, and this is not my belief, this is just a wonder dip, whether it is a human attempt to find patterns of meaning to bring coherence out of chaos when there is just simply complexity. Because how would truly believing in oneness change my daily decisions?
That's an interesting question. Okay, so do you know about the chaos theory in quantum physics? I'm a big fan of Michio Kaku, who's the great, I believe, modern Einstein, who has put forth this theory of string theory. I haven't read his books, but he's a wonderful personality who brings science down to the secular level. All of us are so different. Some of us just have inquiring minds. And you know what? You will have questions until the day you are ready to leave your body. And the moment of truth will await you. I myself have experienced the passing of my parents' life. The other day, a friend of mine was telling a story about how she and a friend were with her cat who was near death. As she explained it, there was this ripple of energy starting at the tip of the tail of the cat. Went through this cat and came out of its mouth. Now, if that isn't magic, if that isn't a phenomena that you can't explain, what is? There's just some things that are a mystery. The near-death experience people are pretty anonymous about what they experienced. You talk to anybody who's had a near-death experience, it's almost like step 1, step 2, step 3. No, it's not your time. They're back. They all see and feel the light, which is consciousness. In Sanskrit, in the yogic world, it's called Chidananda, to be in the state of bliss, feeling consciousness. And that is the state that we attain when we meditate, when we keep at it and go through all the nerve healing and all that. It's good for you to have these questions, and it's good for you to find your answers, because your answers are your answers, not my answers. I know from myself, I've experienced the passing of both my parents and some animals and some friends, and it's a holy thing. It's a holy thing that stills you, just like the birth of a child. It's just the opposite of being birth, except your energy is being recycled in another way. And that magical feeling when you see a newborn, it's just like magic. Whether it's a newborn cat or calf or bird, whatever, it's really magic. The Native Americans just have no answers. They just call it the mystery. There are some things that have no answers, Peter. And I, as an artist, I really prefer it that way. When somebody asks me, like, what is this about? I'll say, that's for you to figure out. I was just the vehicle through which it came. And sometimes I look at some of my work and I'll say, where did that come from? It's not me. It's not my ego, not the one that I know. It comes from some deeper place. Like you talk about Apollo. I've painted the myth of Apollo and Daphne many times. And I didn't even know that it was Apollo and Daphne until a friend was peering over my shoulder saying, "Oh, that's Apollo and Daphne." These things are in our DNA, the mythological approach to life. It's so much a part of our humanness. So for those of us who seek, we find answers in our own way. And for those of you who don't care about the answers, you're not even listening to this podcast.
It's not really about answers because the symbology of a question mark, it's a hook to get to the next question. The answer is a full stop. It stops you inquiring.
No, a good answer will just be a leapfrog of the next evolution. I think people who have conversations where you feel like their answer is a dead stop, it's really
That's the difference.
Yeah, it doesn't feel good to talk to that kind of person. They're the ones who say, "Oh, life is weird." And they'll say, "I know." People who know don't know. People who don't know. That's an old sutra from the most ancient Rig Veda.
What responsibilities arise from deep interconnectedness?
Responsibilities. It really helps to not have such strong opinions when one realizes that we are all interconnected and every opinion is going to be different. When I addressed this very strongly in my book about going into the prison systems and teaching girls yoga and meditation techniques to empower them so they could face their time that they have to be. When we human beings feel like we're in control, that basically eases out any experience of the divine. When we let go of control, I mean, anything like the outcome of a political situation or how much weight we're going to gain by eating that donut. When we let go of control, then we are opening the door to infinite possibilities because there's no telling what's going to happen. But the control versus no control, or in other words, love versus fear is pivotal in that situation. Our experience is just divine if we have the ability to let go of control in any circumstance.
That's a huge subject for another time.
You'll have to ask me back.
Absolutely. And people make a big deal about meditation. I've got to meditate an hour a day. I do 2 hours a day. And I think you can just do 5 minutes a day or whatever
one
time.
breath. Just did one breath. Beginning of this, one breath alters your consciousness.
Exactly. But are there any practices that might help one experience this interconnectedness directly?
I offer mind stillers, I call it, on my YouTube channel. There's many teachers, like I said, who some of them are good, some of them are not so good. There are many podcasts about consciousness uplifting. So if a person is curious, then they have to seek. They become a seeker and they find what works for them, what rings your bell. Different people have different things. Like you like facts, so you would read many scholarly books about consciousness. And I would be the type of person who would just spend that time instead of reading in an altered state of my own making, either through chanting, meditating, doing the asanas of a yoga practice, which awaken the chakras within our spine that uplift our consciousness. There's many techniques in the yogic world. People think when they hear yoga, they just think of the postures, which is the asana. That's like the tip of the iceberg. The yogic world is filled with infinite possibilities of experiencing the divine through these ancient techniques. And I'm not talking about a religion. Yoga is a philosophy, and it's the philosophy of oneness, of union, body, mind, and spirit. Everything you do in the yogic way is with body, mind, and spirit united, not separate. On any given day, for instance, if I'm having an off day, I'll say to myself, do I need to do more body work, a mental challenge, or a spiritual soothing? I have to look at all three aspects of myself and figure out, why am I off that day?
There's a paradox between what is the relationship between intellectual understanding and direct experience. How do I navigate between absolute and relative truth?
Okay, I'm going to get personal then. Have you ever had a meditation teacher?
Many years ago.
Okay, and did you ever do what the teacher said and to develop a practice, which means every day?
It was called the art of Satipatthana.
Maybe you need a refresher course. Maybe there's just one aspect of you that you have nurtured, which you're an intellectual, and maybe you have just gone off and forgotten how important it is to nurture that still, quiet place inside that doesn't have all the answers, but has the experience that can't be defined. That word ineffable, I love that word. Somebody said, what is God, or what is the divine? What is oneness? Yes, we try. We have tried for the last hour and a half to define it, but really, it has to be experienced. I remember the first time when somebody told me that. It was a girlfriend who had gotten into the meditation world earlier than I. She was a really good friend. Her dog was the mother of my dog. We were practically like sisters. She was trying to explain how her life had changed since she became a meditator. She said, I just can't explain it. You just have to experience it. And that's the thing. It's like our feelings. How can you explain a feeling? Poems are written about it. I scratch my head at poetry. Doesn't mean beans to me, quite honestly. But what speaks to me is other forms of art. I get the feeling thing with dance and music and art, but not poetry for some reason. So you need to have the experience, Peter. You need to refresh your desire. If you really have the desire, that means that your soul, your psyche, that higher part of you that is not your ego, has a desire, and it's knocking on your door saying, hey, give me some energy. Do something with me. Then you will start your seeking. Maybe it's not going to be what your previous experience was. I urge you to go onto my YouTube, just type in my name and you'll see I have Mind Stillers. I have podcast with my husband. We've been podcasting Teza Lord podcast, which is a spiritual podcast. And we approach all different sorts of topics. It's not a teaching about how to meditate per se, the podcast, but the Mind Stillers are. Sometimes it's not about just shutting off words. It's choosing the right words and being satisfied with there's not an answer for everything.
If we're not literally one, and I know that we are, but if we're not, then we're deeply and inextricably connected to each other, to our planet, to the cosmos itself. Maybe that's the practical wisdom I can take from this insight, regardless of its ultimate metaphysical truth.
If your experience is that you are not connected, like a friend of mine was recently here and he's a self-proclaimed atheist and he's had a terrible accident. He's now an invalid. He fell off a horse, broke his neck. After 3 years, he has regained some mobility, but not much. I've known him very well from our youth. I said, so you really don't feel the connectedness of the magic of life? He said, nope. I said, what do you believe in? He said, when this is over, it's over. That's what the definition of atheism is, basically. I just said, oh, I'm so sorry for you. I feel so sad that you are not curious about the magic. I've got this beautiful invitation to a party, and you're saying, no, I don't want to go to the party. I'm not even curious about the party. I don't want to know what I have to bring to the party. And he's just saying, nope. And he continued drinking his wine and smoking his pot and taking his mushrooms. He's numbing himself out. He's just numbing himself out until he's going to die. That's his choice. He's not a happy guy.
If people are in denial, good luck in trying to persuade them otherwise.
Yeah. But even if you're just curious, it's good enough reason to want to have the experience, isn't it? If you're curious, you walk down the street and you hear people who are partying and they're making merry and you want to know, what am I missing? Why wasn't I invited? It's like that with oneness. We who are in the frame of mind, we're not special. We have just given attention to that possibility, whereas other people don't. And there's an amazing group of people on this planet, and it's growing by leaps and bounds. One of my favorite teachers is Eckhart Tolle. I bet you would really relate to Eckhart's work. Have you ever explored Eckhart's?
Yes, I have, yes.
The Power of Now and the New Earth, and go to one of his workshops and be with him in his presence. And he doesn't do meditation. He's not into meditation. He has a technique where you are aware of your inner body. You become aware of the energy. So he basically is not a meditator, which is okay. It's just a different approach. But maybe Eckhart will ring your bell. There's also Tara Brach, who's a wonderful psychotherapist, and she's a Buddhist. She has a wonderful podcast filled with all sorts of practical hints about how to deal with the complexities of life from a psychological point of view, and wonderful stories. And there's many great teachers out there. On Being is another podcast that explores the human condition, not so much about meditation, but about the magic of consciousness.
I do set aside about 5 minutes a day to meditate, to go quiet. Like I was saying earlier, before I prepare myself for a podcast, I say a quiet prayer and I still myself, but I don't make a big deal about it.
But that is a big deal because you've said no to regular reality and said yes to us. That's a big deal.
In that space, in that lack of boundary of what is me and what is not me, there's the silence makes a big noise. And there's a lot more I can say about it, but I'm aware of time. But I want to really thank you for sharing your journey and for demonstrating how love can be the most powerful force for illumination in today's world. I see you as an elder, and you continue to inspire me, and to see sacred in the ordinary and the extraordinary in oneself. Thank you so much for being with us today and sharing your wisdom and experiences. Where can people find you, and do you have any wisdom or passing words you want to leave with the audience?
Thank you for summing up so well what we have dwelt on in this past time that we've been talking, Peter. It's my pleasure to be an elder. I went through a ceremony to be crowned when I turned 60, and I'm now 77, and I have a lot more work to do. I have a lot more love to spread. And to me, it all boils down to choosing to stay in a state of love and not going into a state of fear. And I shared with you yesterday, I went through an experience once again where I was shook out of my state of love by my own dear husband. And I had to make choices to come back into the state of love, and privilege as humans to be able to have that choice. That is what we use our rational thinking mind for. We can experience the state of bliss and contentment by being immersed in even just one breath at a time. It doesn't have to be many breaths. It doesn't have to be many minutes, but just making the choice to dive into that heart chamber within us. I invite everybody to check out my website, TezaLord.com. There you'll find the connection to my YouTube, where I have the mind stillers, which are helpful tools to choose to stay in the state of love. Also the podcast and my 5 beautiful books. There are different subjects, and the latest one is a novel. It's a transformative story. I'm most proud of The Bridge Tender. So I hope everybody joins me on the journey of spreading love, the weapon of mass illumination.
Beautiful. Thank you, Teza.
Thank you, Peter.
Namaste.
Namaste.